the dust never settled in Redemption Valley. Not for 10 long years. Not since the day Clayton Hayes buried an empty coffin and said goodbye to the only woman he'd ever loved. But today, standing in the doorway of his ranch house with the afternoon sun burning at his back, Clayton stares at two identical faces that belong to a ghost. Two 7-year-old girls with his late wife's amber eyes look up at him, and one of them whispers the word that stops his heart, "Daddy." Clayton Hayes wasn't always a man of silence. There was a time when laughter echoed through the valley, when his ranch house felt like a home instead of a mausoleum. That was before the stagecoach accident. Before the telegram that arrived on a rain-soaked October morning in 1873, telling him that his bride of 2 years, Evangeline, had perished when her coach tumbled into the Snake River Canyon. They'd been married in the spring of 1871, when the wildflowers turned the valley into a painting and Clayton believed the world was full of promise. Evangeline was a schoolteacher from Boston, refined and educated, who'd come west to escape a life that felt too small for her spirit. She had auburn hair that caught fire in the sunset, and a laugh that could make even the hardest men smile. Clayton had been a widower's son turned successful rancher, and when he met Evangeline at the town's harvest dance, he knew immediately that she was the missing piece of his life. Their love was the kind that made other folks jealous and hopeful all at once. Evangeline brought books and music to the ranch. She taught the local children their letters in a one-room schoolhouse Clayton built for her. She'd sit on the porch in the evenings, reading poetry while Clayton mended fences, and sometimes she'd call out verses to him across the prairie grass, her voice carrying on the wind like a promise. But Evangeline had secrets. She'd grown quiet in their second year of marriage, distracted. She'd taken to riding into town more often, sending telegrams that Clayton never asked about because he trusted her completely. And then came the trip to Denver. She said her sister was ill, that she needed to go help. Clayton had wanted to accompany her, but there was a sickness spreading through his herd, and he couldn't leave. So he'd kissed her goodbye at the stagecoach station, holding her just a moment longer than usual, as if some part of him knew. 3 days later, the telegram arrived. The stagecoach had crashed. 6 passengers dead, including Mrs. Evangeline Hayes. Bodies swept away by the river's current. Nothing recovered except her traveling bag, identified by the embroidered initials she'd stitched herself. Clayton rode to Denver, desperate and disbelieving. The canyon was a scar in the earth, the river below churning with early winter snowmelt. The local sheriff showed him the wreckage, the scattered belongings, Evangeline's bag with its ruined contents. They held a service with an empty coffin. Clayton stood in a Denver cemetery, staring at a headstone that marked a grave with no body, and something inside him died alongside his wife. He returned to Redemption Valley a different man. The ranch continued because work was all he had left. He hired more hands so he wouldn't have to be alone with his thoughts. He tore down Evangeline's schoolhouse because he couldn't bear to look at it. Her books, her dresses, her jewelry, he packed everything into trunks and stored them in the attic, unable to throw them away but unwilling to be reminded. 10 years passed like a slow bleed. Clayton turned 40, his dark hair now streaked with gray at the temples. His face grew harder, his smile rarer. The valley knew him as a fair man but a distant one, someone who kept the world at arm's length because letting anyone close meant risking that kind of pain again. The ranch hands whispered that he was cursed, that love had marked him and moved on. Clayton didn't believe in curses. He believed in work, in the reliability of cattle and horses, in the simple mathematics of survival. Romance was for men who hadn't learned yet that the universe was cruel. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon in April 1883, with the spring roundup just finished and the valley alive with new grass, a hired carriage pulled up the long drive to Clayton's ranch house. Clayton was in the barn, his hands deep in the mechanics of a broken water pump, when young Tommy Chen, one of his ranch hands, came running. "Boss! Boss, you got visitors." Strange ones. Strange didn't begin to cover it. The carriage was fancy, the kind you'd see in San Francisco or Chicago, out of place on a working ranch. The driver was a severe-looking woman in her 50s, dressed in black silk despite the dust of the road. But Clayton's eyes fixed on the 2 children who climbed down from the carriage, identical in every way. Twin girls with auburn hair in careful braids, wearing matching blue dresses that spoke of money and care. They looked around the ranch with wide eyes, amber eyes that Clayton would know anywhere because he'd spent 2 years drowning in eyes exactly that color. The woman in black approached, her face unreadable. "Mr. Clayton Hayes?" "That's right." Clayton's voice came out rougher than he intended. He couldn't stop staring at those little girls. "What's this about?" "My name is Mrs. Dorothy Ashford. I'm a private nurse from Denver. I've been caring for these children for the past 2 months, since their mother's passing." She paused, watching his face carefully. "Their mother was Evangeline Ashford Hayes. I believe she was your wife." The world tilted. Clayton grabbed the fence rail to steady himself. "That's not possible. Evangeline died 10 years ago." "I can assure you, Mr. Hayes, that's not accurate. She died 2 months ago, in a hospital in Denver, from consumption. These are her daughters." "Your daughters?" "Amelia and Charlotte Hayes." One of the twins, Charlotte, he'd learn later, stepped forward with the fearless curiosity of a 7-year-old. "Mama said you were the bravest man in the whole West. Are you really our daddy?" Clayton's knees threatened to give out. He sank onto the porch step, unable to form words. The nurse continued, her voice clinical but not unkind. "Evangeline came to me 3 months ago, very ill. She knew she was dying. She told me everything, Mr. Hayes. The guilt had eaten at her for years. She wanted you to know the truth before the end, but she was too afraid, too ashamed." "Ashamed of what? What truth?" Clayton's voice cracked. "She died. I identified her belongings. I buried her." "No, sir. You buried a woman named Sarah Connolly, a passenger on that stagecoach who happened to be carrying Evangeline's bag. Evangeline had given it to her to hold while she stepped out at a rest stop. The bag was the only thing that survived intact enough to identify. Evangeline wasn't on the coach when it crashed." Clayton's mind reeled. "Then where was she?" Mrs. Ashford glanced at the twins, then back to Clayton. "Perhaps we should speak privately." Clayton looked at those 2 little faces, mirror images of innocence and hope, and shook his head. "They're here. They deserve to know their mother's story. Tell me everything." The nurse nodded slowly. "Evangeline was pregnant when she left for Denver. She just discovered it and hadn't told you yet. She was going to tell you when she returned. But she wasn't going to visit a sick sister, Mr. Hayes. She was meeting with a lawyer regarding her father." "Her father?" "She said he died when she was young." "Another lie she told, I'm afraid. Her father, Arthur Ashford, was a wealthy businessman in Boston. A cruel man who'd disowned her when she refused to marry the man he'd chosen. She fled west to escape him. But he'd found her, threatened you. He sent word that if she didn't return to Boston and renounce her marriage, he'd destroy everything you owned, ruin your reputation, perhaps worse." Clayton's fists clenched. "She should have told me. We could have fought him together. She was trying to protect you. She went to Denver to negotiate with his lawyers. But during that trip, everything changed. The stagecoach crashed. Sarah Connolly died carrying Evangeline's possessions. And Evangeline realized she had an opportunity, a terrible, desperate opportunity. If everyone believed she was dead, her father would have no leverage. You'd be safe. The child she carried would be safe. So she let me grieve. She let me bury an empty coffin and mourn for 10 years. Clayton's voice was hollow with betrayal. She disappeared into Denver's East Side, changed her name back to Ashford. She took work as a seamstress. When she discovered she was carrying twins, she nearly returned to you." Mrs. Ashford pulled a letter from her bag and handed it to Clayton. "She wrote you dozens of letters over the years, Mr. Hayes. She never sent them. She was too afraid that her father would discover you were all alive, that he'd make good on his threats. And then, about 3 years ago, she learned her father had died. By then, she'd convinced herself it was too late, that you'd moved on, that you'd hate her for what she'd done." Charlotte tugged on Clayton's sleeve. Mama talked about you all the time. She showed us your picture. She said you had a ranch with 100 horses and that you could rope a steer from 100 yards away. Amelia, the quieter twin, added softly, she cried a lot. Especially at night. She said she made a terrible mistake, but she was too scared to fix it. Clayton looked at these children, his children, and felt a decade of carefully constructed walls begin to crack. Why now? Why bring them to me after all this time? Mrs. Ashford's stern face softened with something like pity. Because she's dead, Mr. Hayes. And with her dying breath, she made me promise to bring her daughters to their father. She said you deserved to know the truth, and they deserved to know their father. She left you something else too. She handed him a small package wrapped in cloth. Inside was a photograph of Evangeline, older than he remembered her, thinner and worn by illness, but unmistakably his wife. Beside it was a wedding ring, the one he'd placed on her finger in 1871, and a letter addressed in her handwriting, to Clayton, the only man I ever loved, and the worst lie I ever told. Clayton sat alone in his study that night, the twins asleep in the guest room that Mrs. Ashford had hastily prepared before departing with promises to return in a week to check on the children's transition. The letter sat on his desk like an unexploded bomb. His whiskey glass was empty, but he didn't refill it. He needed to be clear-headed for this, even though every instinct screamed to get drunk enough to believe this was all a nightmare. He broke the seal and began to read. My dearest Clayton. If you're reading this, then I am gone, and Dorothy has kept her promise. I imagine you're angry. You have every right to be. What I did to you is unforgivable, and yet I beg you to try to understand. That October morning when I left for Denver, I was carrying our child. I just discovered it the week before, and I was waiting for the right moment to tell you. I was so happy, Clayton. So terrified and thrilled and certain that our family was just beginning. But my father's lawyers found me in town. They gave me an ultimatum: return to Boston, annul our marriage, marry Harrison Blackwell, the man my father had chosen, or they would destroy you. They had fabricated evidence of cattle theft, forged documents that would make you look like a criminal. My father was powerful enough, ruthless enough, to see you hanged if I refused him. I went to Denver to fight back, to find a lawyer who could stop him. But then the accident happened. When I heard about the crash, when I learned that Sarah Connolly had died carrying my bag, I saw a way out. A terrible way, but the only way I could see to save you. If I was dead, my father had no leverage. He couldn't force me to marry Harrison. He couldn't hurt you to punish me. So I let the lie stand. I became Evangeline Ashford again, buried deep in Denver's streets where no one knew me. And then I discovered I was carrying twins. Clayton, I held Amelia in one arm and Charlotte in the other, minutes after they were born, and I almost told the doctor to send word to you. I came so close. But fear won. Fear that my father would find out. Fear that I'd put you and our daughters in danger. Fear that I'd already lost you by my lies. As the girls grew, I told them about their father. I described your strength, your kindness, the way you laugh only with your eyes when you're trying not to show amusement. I showed them the photograph I'd stolen from the ranch, the one of you standing by the corral fence, looking like every promise the West ever made. 3 years ago, I learned my father had died. I should have come to you then. But I was a coward, Clayton. I convinced myself you'd remarried, that you'd built a new life. I convinced myself you'd hate me for what I'd done, and I couldn't bear that. It was selfish. All of it was selfish. The consumption came on slowly, then all at once. When the doctor told me I had months at most, I finally found my courage. Not enough to face you, I'm a coward to the end, but enough to make sure our daughters knew their father. They are brilliant, Clayton. Amelia loves books and can read anything you put in front of her. Charlotte is brave and wild, always climbing trees and catching frogs. They have your stubbornness and, God help them, my tendency to overthink everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I'm begging you to love them. They're innocent in all of this. They deserve a father who will teach them to ride and protect them from the world's cruelties and show them that love doesn't always end in betrayal. There's money. I saved everything I could from my seamstress work. It's in a bank account in their names, held by Dorothy Ashford. It's not much, but it should help with their care. I loved you, Clayton. I never stopped. Every morning I woke up and chose the lie again, and every morning I hated myself a little more. But I never stopped loving you. You were the best part of my life, and leaving you was the worst mistake I ever made. If there's a heaven, I hope I get to see you again someday. I hope you'll have forgiven me by then. But if you can't forgive me, please don't punish our daughters for my sins. They need you. Forever yours, even in death, Evangeline. Clayton set the letter down with shaking hands. The candle on his desk had burned low, casting shadows that danced across the walls like ghosts. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to rage at the woman who'd let him mourn for a decade while she lived in the same city where he'd buried an empty coffin. But all he could feel was a vast, aching sadness for the life they'd lost, for the years they'd missed, for the fear that had eaten away at Evangeline until she died alone, unable to come home. He climbed the stairs to the guest room and stood in the doorway, watching the twins sleep. They were tangled together in the big bed, Amelia's arm flung over Charlotte's shoulder, their breathing synchronized. In the moonlight streaming through the window, they looked exactly like Evangeline had when she slept, that same peaceful expression that had made him fall in love with her in the first place. These were his daughters. His and Evangeline's. The family he thought he'd lost was here, transformed into two 7-year-old miracles who'd called him daddy with such hope in their voices. Clayton sat in the rocking chair by the window and watched them sleep until dawn broke over the valley. The next weeks were a dance of awkwardness and wonder. Charlotte was the easy one, boundlessly enthusiastic about ranch life. She wanted to see everything, do everything, learn everything. Clayton found himself teaching her to feed the horses, to recognize different bird calls, to track animals by their prints in the mud. She had no fear, climbing fences and chasing chickens with wild abandon that made his heart stop a dozen times a day. Amelia was different. She watched everything with Evangeline's thoughtful eyes, quiet and assessing. She spent long hours in Clayton's study, pulling down books and reading in the afternoon sunlight. She asked careful questions about her mother, about the ranch, about Clayton's life before they arrived. She was polite, but there was a wall there, as if she was protecting herself from disappointment. Mrs. Ashford returned after 2 weeks and stayed for 3 days, observing the household with her critical eye. On her last evening, she found Clayton on the porch, watching the twins play in the yard. "They've settled in remarkably well," she said, settling into the rocking chair beside him. "Charlotte has. Amelia's still deciding whether to trust me. Amelia is like her mother. She loves deeply, but she's afraid of being hurt. Evangeline told me once that she'd learned early to protect her heart from her father's cruelty. She passed that caution to Amelia, I think." Clayton was quiet for a moment. "Did she suffer? At the end?" "The consumption was painful, yes. But she had good care. And she had the girls. They were with her when she passed. She held their hands and told them she was going to see their father soon, that she'd make sure he knew how much she loved him." Mrs. Ashford paused. "She talked to you, in those last moments. As if you were there in the room. She apologized over and over. She asked you to dance with her one more time." Clayton's throat tightened. "I would have. If I'd known. I believe she knew that. That's why she sent them to you. It was her way of asking for that dance, even if she couldn't be there to take your hand." That night, Clayton pulled down the trunks from the attic. Evangeline's dresses, her books, her jewelry, he laid them all out carefully. In the morning, he called the twins into the study. "These belong to your mother," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I want you to have them. To remember her by." Charlotte immediately draped herself in a silk shawl, spinning until she was dizzy. But Amelia approached the items slowly, reverently. She picked up a small leather-bound journal, its pages filled with Evangeline's handwriting. "What's this?" she asked. "Her diary, I think. I never read it. It was private." Amelia opened it carefully and began to read aloud. "March 1871. Today I met the man I'm going to marry. His name is Clayton Hayes, and when he smiled at me, I forgot every word in the English language." Clayton's breath caught. Amelia continued, flipping through the pages. June 1871. Clayton asked me to marry him today, under the cottonwood tree by the creek. I said yes before he finished asking. I'd never been so certain of anything in my life. She looked up at Clayton, and for the first time, there were tears in her eyes. She loved you so much. Every page is about you. About how happy you made her. About how she couldn't wait to build a life with you. Keep reading, Clayton said softly. Both of you. Every word. That's your mother's voice. That's who she was before she got scared. Over the following months, the girls devoured Evangeline's journals. They learned about the woman who'd given them life through her own words, her hopes and dreams and fears all laid bare in ink. And slowly, through those pages, Clayton began to heal too. He remembered the woman he'd loved, not the ghost who'd haunted him, but the real Evangeline with her laughter and her passion and her desperate love for her family. Summer turned the valley golden. Clayton taught both girls to ride, Charlotte on a spirited paint mare and Amelia on a gentle gelding who tolerated her hesitant hands. They helped with the ranch work, gathering eggs and feeding cattle, learning the rhythms of a life connected to the land. One evening in July, Amelia found Clayton mending a bridle on the porch. She sat beside him silently for a long moment before speaking. "Mama wrote about dancing with you. She said you danced with her in the kitchen when she was making bread, and you got flour in her hair." Clayton smiled at the memory. She was terrible at making bread. But she sang while she kneaded the dough, and I couldn't help myself. "Would you teach us?" "To dance, I mean. Like you danced with Mama." Clayton set down the bridle. Charlotte had appeared from nowhere, drawn by the conversation. Both girls looked at him with identical hopeful expressions. "I haven't danced in 10 years, he said. "Then it's time," Amelia replied with a certainty that reminded him so much of Evangeline it hurt. So there, on the porch as the sun set over Redemption Valley, Clayton Hayes taught his daughters to waltz. He hummed the tune that Evangeline used to sing, and he spun them around until they were laughing and dizzy and alive with joy. And for the first time since that October morning in 1873, Clayton felt like he was home. Autumn arrived with its promise of change. The twins had been with Clayton for 6 months, and the ranch house had transformed from a mausoleum into a home. There was laughter at dinner, books scattered across every surface, muddy boots by the door, and the constant chatter of children who'd found their place in the world. But Clayton knew there were still questions that needed answering. One evening, after the girls were asleep, he rode into town and found Father Miguel at the church. "I need to talk about forgiveness," Clayton said, sitting in the empty pew. The old priest settled beside him. "For Evangeline? Everyone keeps telling me I should be angry. She lied to me. She let me grieve for 10 years. She kept my daughters from me." Clayton's hands were fists on his knees. "But I can't be angry. Is that wrong? Why do you think you can't be angry?" "Because I understand. If someone threatened to destroy everything I loved, to hurt the people I cared about, I might have made the same choice." She was scared and young and trapped. And she paid for that choice with 10 years of loneliness and a life lived in hiding. "How can I be angry at someone who suffered as much as I did?" Father Miguel was quiet for a moment. "Forgiveness isn't about whether someone deserves it, Clayton. It's about whether you deserve peace. You've carried grief for a decade. Do you want to carry anger for another decade? Or do you want to live?" The girls ask about her constantly. They want to know everything: what she liked to eat, what songs she sang, whether she was scared of storms. And every question is a reminder that she's gone. That I can't ask her why she didn't come back after her father died. Why she didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. Perhaps she didn't trust herself. Fear is a powerful thing, Clayton. It makes us believe lies about our own strength. Evangeline convinced herself she was protecting you, but maybe she was really protecting herself from the possibility that you wouldn't forgive her. Clayton thought about the letter, about Evangeline's words. I convinced myself you'd hate me, and I couldn't bear that. She was wrong, he said quietly. I would have forgiven her. I would have understood. Then tell her daughters that. Tell them their mother made a mistake born of love, not malice. Tell them that love is complicated and messy and sometimes people hurt each other even when they're trying their hardest not to. And forgive her, Clayton. Not because she deserves it, but because those girls deserve to grow up without carrying their parents' pain. Clayton rode home as the stars emerged, the valley spread below him like a promise. At the ranch, he found both girls awake, reading in the study by lamplight. Couldn't sleep, he asked. Charlotte shook her head. We were reading Mama's journal from when we were born. She talks about how she wanted to name us after people she loved. Amelia was her grandmother's name. Charlotte was her best friend from school. She says she whispered your name to us every night when we were babies, Amelia added. She said she wanted us to know you even if we never met you. Clayton sat on the floor between them, these two miracles who'd walked into his life and called him Daddy. Your mother made a choice that hurt a lot of people, including herself. She was trying to protect us, but she was also scared. Fear makes people do things they regret. But I want you both to know something important. Both girls looked at him with Evangeline's eyes. I forgive her. I understand why she did what she did, even if I wish she'd trusted me enough to tell me the truth. And I want you to know that what she did doesn't change how much she loved us. Love isn't perfect. People aren't perfect. But that doesn't make the love any less real. Charlotte climbed into his lap, something she'd started doing when she needed comfort. Do you think she knows? That we're here with you? That we're okay? I think if there's any justice in this universe, she knows. And I think she's at peace now, knowing you're home where you belong. Amelia leaned against his shoulder. Is this home? Really? Clayton wrapped his arms around both of them. This is home. For all of us. Forever. Spring returned to Redemption Valley, and with it, the wildflowers that Evangeline had loved. Clayton and the twins rode out to the meadow where he'd proposed to their mother 12 years earlier, carrying a small wooden cross that Charlotte had carved with surprising skill. They planted it under the cottonwood tree, and Clayton told them stories about Evangeline, the real ones, the happy ones, the moments before fear had stolen her away. He told them about her laugh, about the way she'd corrected his grammar while smiling, about the morning she'd tried to ride his most stubborn horse and ended up in a mud puddle, laughing so hard she couldn't stand. She would be so proud of you both, Clayton said as they stood by the marker. You're brave like her. Smart like her. Kind like her. We're like you too, Amelia said. Charlotte has your stubbornness. I have your habit of thinking too much before acting. Clayton smiled. Then you got the best of both of us. As they rode back to the ranch, Charlotte chattered about the foal that would be born any day now, about the cake she wanted to make for Amelia's birthday, about the new books she'd ordered from the catalog. Amelia was quieter, but she rode close to Clayton, comfortable now with his presence. That evening, as the sun set over the valley in shades of gold and crimson, Clayton stood on his porch and watched his daughters chase fireflies in the yard. Their laughter carried on the evening breeze, mixing with the sounds of the ranch cattle lowing, horses nickering, the creek babbling in the distance. This wasn't the life he'd imagined 10 years ago when he'd buried an empty coffin and believed love had died with Evangeline. It wasn't the life Evangeline had imagined when she'd made her terrible choice in a Denver hospital room, dying alone because she was too afraid to come home. But it was life. Real and imperfect and full of second chances. The dust had finally settled in Redemption Valley. And Clayton Hayes, widowed rancher turned father, had learned that sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about perfect romance or happy endings. Sometimes they're about forgiveness, about grace, about two little girls who walk through your door and call you daddy and give you a reason to believe in hope again. He'd lost Evangeline twice, once to a lie, once to death. But through it all, love had survived. It had changed shape, transformed from the passionate romance of youth into something deeper, something that transcended time and mistakes and fear. In the fading light, Clayton could almost see Evangeline standing beside him, her hand in his, watching their daughters play. He could almost hear her whisper what she'd written in that final letter: "I never stopped loving you." "I never stopped either," he whispered back to the wind. And in Redemption Valley, where the dust finally settled and the wildflowers bloomed eternal, a family made whole again by truth and forgiveness prepared to face tomorrow together. And there you have it, folks. A story about love, loss, and the courage it takes to forgive. If this tale touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments what you'd do if someone you loved came back from the past. Would you forgive them? Could you start over? We love hearing your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this journey through the Wild West, give us a like and share this story with someone who appreciates a good romance with a twist. Until next time, remember, the best stories are the ones where love finds a way, no matter how long the road or how deep the pain. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next tale.